Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
As schools prepare to open this fall, join us for a special Capital Outlook with Wyoming Superintendent of Public Instruction Jillian Balow and Senator Hank Coe and Representative David Northrup. We'll work to understand how K-12 schools will cope with not only the pandemic and issues like masks, social distancing, and virtual learning, but also with a looming and massive budget crisis that will impact Wyoming schools for generations. Capital Outlook starts now.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
By a grant from AARP, serving the needs and providing real possibilities for the over 50 population in Wyoming. AARP Wyoming. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And by Wyoming Humanities, celebrating our heritage, strengthening our democracy, and growing Wyoming's creative and cultural economy for over 50 years. Visit thinkwy.org.
And as we begin this special Capital Outlook, I'm Craig Blumenschein from Wyoming PBS, and we are pleased to be joined by Wyoming Superintendent of Public Instruction, Jillian Balow. Superintendent, welcome to Capital Outlook.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks for having me on.
Boy, it's a difficult and challenging, yet kind of an exciting time for your office and for teachers, staff, students all across the state of Wyoming. Madam Superintendent, last week you reported to the governor and to the state at the news conference that you felt then that the state was in a good place. We're a week later. Do you feel that today?
You know, not much has changed in terms of metrics for the state, but what has changed for me personally is that I've had a chance to visit with lots of superintendents, teachers, educators, and parents since last week, and there still remains that anxiety and all of the unknowns, but it is coupled with a great deal of excitement about getting back to school. I think as students in some areas are beginning to get back to school, some of the anxiety is waning as teachers and parents and others realize that kids are going to do just fine. It's our responsibility to make sure we stay on top of the COVID-19 metrics, to make sure that students are following all of the new health protocols, but I firmly believe that the enthusiasm and the sense of responsibility in every single school will prevail, and students will have a good year, no matter what it looks like.
It certainly is a little bit different, and you talked about that. You said that in-person learning is going to be different. Madam Superintendent, will it still be great? Will it still be good?
It will. This is also an interesting time because we're at a bit of a crossroads. As a state, we've been very focused on mitigation or response to a crisis for the last almost 6 months. And now we're still dealing with the response to the crisis, but we're also really enthused about moving ahead on behalf of Wyoming kids. And so that creates a lot more work. We have to double down our efforts everywhere from the halls of the legislature and my office to classrooms and families across the state. But there is learning that's taking place on day one of school, and not just learning about COVID-19 and the new protocols.
So let's talk about COVID specifically, Madam Superintendent. Will teachers be tested? Will students be tested? Are districts opting in to the program that was just announced a week ago? And I think more importantly, in rural Wyoming, can students get those tests, and can parents get those tests for their children inexpensively and quickly?
I mean, testing availability continues to be a critical issue, no matter if we're talking about rural Wyoming or an urban city across the nation. And so we'll continue to work on testing availability, supply pipeline, logistics, but we really hope that as we go further, more tests will be available. That's not to say that there aren't any today, but we hope that they continue to be available. So let me break down what the testing looks like. Last week, the governor rolled out a new program that we're starting called surveillance testing that will mimic or look an awful lot like what exists in long-term care facilities for staff. This is specifically for staff, teachers, faculty, and other staff members at schools. And tests will be available at state expense using CARES money for up to 20% of a staff in a given district on a regular and rolling basis. This does two things. It gives us some school community data, one more really important and valid and reliable metric that school districts and health professionals can look at. And it also identifies positive cases in school districts among staff. And that's really important because we know our teachers don't want to be at school if they test positive for COVID-19. And this is one way for an asymptomatic teacher to find out with certainty whether or not they have COVID-19.
Superintendent, why is it an opt-in program? Why isn't it almost a requirement that we surveil, if you will, paraprofessionals, bus drivers, teachers, and other staff?
Yeah, I think at this point, Governor Gordon, Dr. Harris, nor I are interested in mandating tests for a certain population. That hasn't been done to this point across the state of Wyoming, and I don't think that we're interested in doing that. Even if it is an opt-in program, we believe that the data that it will yield, it's sort of a random sampling, if you will, and the data that it will yield will still provide really good data for communities to use and for the state to use, whether or not all staff members or all districts opt in.
Madam Superintendent, as I traveled across the state of Wyoming in the last couple months, I think it's a fair assessment to say that communities have taken COVID-19 perhaps differently than others. Some communities, Cheyenne, for example, when I go to the store, you see a lot of masks. Other communities, you may not see a lot of masks on, even though they're required. And so the question becomes this. There are students who are going to come to school next week or the week after next, and their parents perhaps, or their relatives perhaps, have not thought masks have been a good idea, but they are going to be mandated, if you will, to wear that mask or not come to school. Is Wyoming ready for those school districts who have that requirement to make that work, so to speak?
Yeah. On July 1st, my office, along with the Department of Health and the Governor's Office, released what's called the Smart Start Guidance. It's really a critical conversation guide for school districts to use as they plan to reopen. Every single school district across the state has to, at a minimum, meet the state health orders. That includes social distancing or the wearing of masks. Again, that's at a minimum. I'm summarizing here.
Sure.
So what we've seen happen, and I think this is good not just in this COVID-19 environment, but for years to come, is we've seen school districts offer a lot of options to families who are not comfortable sending their kids back for some of the reasons that you described, or maybe their students or their children or someone in their family has an underlying health condition. In that case, a lot of school districts have provided options within their public school system to provide education virtually, or in a homebound situation, or in another way remotely. There are also options that have existed long before COVID-19 in our state that parents can exercise that include virtual education, homeschooling, or some private school choices. So to say that if a family isn't comfortable sending their children back to school, that they don't have any other options and what do we do is simply not accurate. And not that you said that, but I just don't want any families in Wyoming to feel that they're pigeonholed into sending their kids back to a traditional brick and mortar school, because every district has some options in place to deal with kids.
And then you get into all of the discussion about childcare and broadband and all of those other things, which are probably beyond the scope. And I want to talk to you about virtual learning for just a moment.
Yeah.
You said that in-person learning is going to be different today than it was. I think virtual learning, too, is going to be very different than it was even 6 months ago. Some districts, anecdotally to me, have been a little bit surprised at the number of kids that are enrolling in those virtual learning opportunities. Is that in any way a concern for you, who I think I've heard said that in-person learning is really best if it can happen?
Well, if I or my son had to choose between top-notch technology, top-notch virtual education, or the best teacher in the world, I'd pick both. But I would pick a great teacher above that. But great teachers also teach virtually, and that's really the key, the linchpin to all of this. Whether teaching is remote or whether it's in person, great teachers continue to be the linchpin and sort of the key factor in all of this. So in-person instruction is really important for kids' socialization, for their opportunities to learn behaviors that we expect in society, for their opportunity to interact socially, for sort of the system, if you will, to have eyes on them, to monitor their well-being. And those are things that we can't accomplish quite as well in a virtual environment. So while certainly I think that in-person will continue to be the preference, virtual education will continue to improve, perhaps not ever replace in-person instruction, but will continue to improve as a way to engage and teach students in a really meaningful and high-quality way.
I can't let you go, Superintendent, without talking about the fiscal challenges that are on I don't even know if you say they're on the horizon anymore. They're barreling at districts like a train and well in sight, and they can see the big headlight. Often in the recent election, I've heard many legislators kind of, and I'm paraphrasing, that we're going to retool education so it's just as good but more affordable. And then you hear from teachers asking the question, does affordable equal worse? Does affordable mean more children in my classroom? Does affordable mean less paras? Does affordable mean that there's no way the state of Wyoming can do what we're doing now with significantly less money? What guidance are you giving districts and teachers about this?
Yeah, at this point, a couple things. We have to remember that school funding is squarely charged to the Wyoming legislature. They've been grappling with this for years. They've made multiple cuts to education in different areas, and I've worked with them, collaborated with them along the way at every juncture. The bottom line is this is not a deficit that we can simply cut away for years and years to come without having a significant and deleterious effect on classroom teaching and the quality of education that we're able to provide. So at the end of the day, I think that we need to continue to grapple with finding reductions and efficiencies, but also continue to identify new revenue streams for education. COVID-19 sort of adds this new issue into the equation because we have a lot of one-time expenditures and some expenditures as a result of COVID-19, like virtual education, that will need to be sustained with funding. Does that take the place of other funding? I'm not sure. Those are really critical conversations that the legislature needs to have with stakeholders and partners, including myself and the governor, in the coming months to really make a determination. As you know, Craig, we're under recalibration right now, which means that Pica Sanadna Consulting Group is working for the legislature to identify or re-identify what an adequate and equitable education is for Wyoming students. So far, they have not presented an update or a report in any formal way. As soon as they begin some of those formal reports, right now they're in the information gathering stage, I think we'll have a little clearer picture about what our levers are and what some of our most significant challenges are. But obviously the biggest challenge is that we're spending more on education than we have, and that is not sustainable over time.
And we're going to next visit with Senator Hank Coe and Representative David Northrup, the two chairs of their respective bodies' education committee. as they really begin to dig into recalibration, Superintendent, that you just talked about. There's so much to discuss. Your summer was not the summer you had planned. I know that. I think all of us can say pretty much the same thing, but I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us on Capital Outlook.
Well, Craig, thank you so much. And I want to just hats off, give some props to the chairman of the Joint Education Committee, Senator Coe and Representative Northrup. They've led through really challenging times and made a significant impact on education. And I'm grateful for their statesmanship, for their leadership, and for their partnership.
And we'll visit with the two legislators next. Stay with us. And as we continue on with this special Capital Outlook, we're pleased to be joined by Senator Hank Coe and Representative David Northrup, the two chairs of their respective bodies, our education committees. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you.
Nice to be here, Craig.
So we're in the process, and you're meeting this head on and kind of rethinking what education might be like for generations, really. And there are really two things going on in my eyes. Your education committee's deep dive into what the K-12 program is and should be, and also this fiscal crisis that is approaching us. And of course, then we have recalibration coming down the pike. So I think what I'll begin is where are you in that process of redefining K-12, and what is it today that you want patrons to really understand and focus on? And Senator Coe, let me start with you.
Well, thank you, Craig. Where are we with K-12 right now? $510 million short to fund K-12. That's the opening part of it. The school foundation program has a different revenue stream than the general fund does. And because of the shortfalls in the school foundation program, we find ourselves balancing the school foundation program out of the general fund, mainly the LSRA.
The reserve account.
And we've been doing that for a while. With the school foundation program, as everybody knows, used to be over 60% of the funding came from local ad valorem taxes. And as we've seen the changes in assessed valuation, everybody pays a 25, 12, and 6 mils in property tax. And as the assessed valuations go down, the contributions to the school foundation program of local ad valorem are going to decrease as well. But remember that local assessed valuation runs a year behind. So Park County, for example, will see a very attractive year this year for assessed valuation because it's based on last May. So this all factors into what we're looking at when we start talking about 1.6 to 1.7 billion. And I just reviewed something today. The actual total amount spent on education is about 1.9. If you factor in other revenue streams, community colleges, what they do for K-12, et cetera. So we find ourselves in a real pickle. And I mean a real pickle. And if there's an 800-pound gorilla in the room with the problems that the state has, the state, remember, is looking at a $750 million shortfall themselves, over and above the 510 for K-12. So we find ourselves in a real pickle. How do we proceed with the decline in minerals, knowing full well that coal's not going to come back and contribute, if ever. Oil is way down, natural gas is way down. So we have the problem with K-12 that the rest of the state has in funding. And remembering that the general fund revenues are, the three primary revenue streams to the general fund are sales tax, which has been better than we expected, since COVID started. Severance tax is our number 2 contributor to the general fund, and then investment income.
Representative Northrup, what's your take? You guys are going to make decisions here that are going to be critical in how Wyoming's education plays out, K-12 education specifically, in the future. What are you thinking today?
It'll be critical to start thinking about K-12 in that we're going to have a whole different look of the program that we're going to put together. There's a lot of push on technology, as we're seeing today using Zoom. How long this takes place and what we do with it is going to be an interesting play out in the future of the state. Are we going to have Zoom classrooms for a year or 2 years? And what does that do to the picture of the economics? Is the cost still the same? Do we have fixed costs that are still the same? Do we have, of course, you got to heat a building, but if nobody's in the building, you have to heat it to 72 degrees. So, and then when you look at how we're going to be programming kids and classrooms, that's changing with technology. So it's going to be an interesting couple of years here.
Where are the goalposts here? If you both are looking head on at a $510 million problem, where's the goalpost to get that to balance? there's cuts and there's revenue. Where are these two going to meet?
Well, I can take a shot at that, Craig. I'm on recalibration. I don't chair it this year. It's chaired by Senator Kinski and Representative Summers. And honestly, this recalibration will be a different animal. And I first, did recalibration in 2005, chaired it with now Senator Wasserberger. Then I did it in 10, and then I did it in 15. And we had an interim, recal with, I can't remember the name of the firm, something, and which was kind of a dud. And so because the Supreme Court requires us to recalibrate the funding model every 5 years, we're going to proceed with recalibration. From the Senate perspective, we're going to ask for some real different things in it, rather than just have the Picus and Auden come back and report to us. We're going to ask them for some very, very, very difficult questions and try to dive down to make sure that when we end up with an evidence-based funding model that's cost-based and goes back to the Supreme Court mandate of providing a common basket of educational goods and services to every kid in the state to afford that kid equal opportunity and is adequate. And I want to emphasize the word adequate. That's what the Supreme Court's mandated. And plus it has to be cost-based, which is why we have consultants. So we're going to ask some serious questions of our consultants this year. And, I'll just give you some examples here. We're going to ask for a deep dive into the model. This is from the Senate perspective. Identify components in P&O for educational attainment. In other words, what are the add-ons that the Wyoming legislature's put in? Can we still afford those? Rank the order of those components. Definition of adequate, and I want to emphasize adequate. Adequate came out of the Supreme Court decisions. And one of the things that the Supreme Court did do, it said that the legislature, the state of Wyoming, will fund education, K-12 education, spare no expense. Resources will not be a driving factor of that. And the legislature can determine what is in fact an adequate K-12 education.
As long as it's uniform, correct?
As long as it's uniform. That's what recalibration this time is going to, I think, look like a different animal. It's going to be a different deal because both sides, both chairmen that I've heard them say so far, know full well that we're going to have to make reductions in how we fund K-12. We're absolutely just going to have to do it.
I think that we're going to have cuts. There will probably be in the neighborhood of $100 million in cuts, roughly speaking, and that there will have to be some revenue. Now, whether they take the revenue out of new revenue in a form of a sales tax, for example, or another 1 or 2 mills on property tax, that has yet to be even talked about. But we can definitely take it out of the LSRA, but that means that that money's not available for doing the general fund balancing. And then that means that that's either a deeper cut in the general fund side of the equation or we have to raise revenue somewhere.
That bucket's not infinite.
That's correct.
Senator Cole, what are you thinking about that?
Well, having already had a recal meeting, recalibration and, staying in touch with my colleagues on the Senate side, this is a problem that we knew 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. That we couldn't tax our way out of this situation. and we couldn't cut our way out of this situation. And the Governor Meade made that statement a number of times. And so we're going to have to be realistic, first of all, to meet the core challenge. We can't just go out there and have Picus and Auden, our consultants, come in with a model, evidence-based model, and then whack it. We can't do that because we have a court obligation out there.
So during the campaign, I often saw, and I talked to Superintendent Balow about this, legislators and prospective legislators say essentially the following, and I'm paraphrasing here, but we need to retool education so that it's just as good as it is, that it's just as good as it was, but is affordable. And then you hear from people who are in the classroom, what does affordable mean? Does it mean bigger, more students in my class, 30 kids in my class? Does it mean I don't have paraprofessionals anymore? But bottom line, does affordable mean worse? Can affordable, from everything that you have seen, mean maintain Wyoming's, I think that you could say, great quality K-12 system? Representative Northrup, you get the first crack at that.
So I just got done finishing campaigning quite a bit, and I've talked to a lot of people and a lot of teachers, and they're all concerned about that. If you talk to parents will say, oh my God, you need to pay the teachers more because that's a hell of a job that they're doing right now, educating my kids. The other side of that is, of course, that we don't have the money to pay for it. And so we are going to have to do something to balance the equation. There's between 600 and 900 ghost teachers out there. Mm-hmm. And districts are saying, when I went and talked to districts, they said, well, give us a cut, but give it to us in a percentage. Let's say it's a 12% cut. If it's a 12% cut, tell us you cut 12% of your budget because that's what you're not going to get from the state. And we'll make the cuts where we see that we can make the cuts. Now, that puts it back in local control. It's always been a favorite of mine is to have it in local control. I think that the government closest to the people is always the best. So that's kind of where I would lean to is maybe let's decide what we can pay for and then put it back into the school districts and on block grant and just say, you guys figure it out.
I'm concerned, though, that then what this district might decide is different than what this district's going to decide. And the Supreme Court, again, is going to have a say in this. Senator Coe?
Well, I can't add on a lot to what David said, but I can tell you he hit on ghost teachers. And there's over 600 teachers that the model funds out there that have never been hired. And remember also that in the model, when that model provides for a certain teacher in a certain district, health insurance follows them.
I want to tell our viewers that there's 2 dates, in my mind, 3 dates actually, that they need to pay attention to if they're interested in this education discussion. Your next education meeting is September 3rd, and I think that's available virtually for anyone to watch and anyone to see. I think the Legislative Service Office does a great job in making those virtual meetings available, and as the next recalibration meeting is set for September 8th and 9th. And I think it's just critical for people who are interested in education to be highly interested in both of those meetings. Well, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure again to visit with you. Again, these are tough issues. I appreciate your time today as well as the superintendent's earlier. And I want to tell our viewers we're going to continue to have these capital outlook discussions through the fall leading up to the next session of the Wyoming legislature. So from all of us at Wyoming PBS and for the folks who visited with us today, thank you so much for joining us and have a good evening.